Welcome back to Abyss of Horror. Pull up a chair, get comfortable, turn the lights down if you want. Though honestly, after what I'm about to tell you, you might want to keep them on. Before we begin tonight, I have a question for you, and I want you to really think about it. Don't just let it slide past. Actually sit with it for a second. Have you ever been driving, late at night, long road, nobody else around, and felt, somewhere deep in your gut, that something was slightly, indefinably off? Not wrong enough to stop, not wrong enough to call anyone, just this low, persistent hum at the back of your mind that whispers, I have been here before. I have seen this before. Something about this road is not right. Most of us shake it off, blame it on tiredness, on the strange hypnosis of white lines on dark asphalt, mile after mile after mile. We tell ourselves it's nothing and we keep driving. But what if it wasn't nothing? What if the road remembered you and wasn't finished with you yet? This is the familiar road. His name was Dae Jung, 44 years old, 17 years behind the wheel of a long-haul freight truck. A man who had put more kilometers between himself and any fixed point than most people accumulate in 3 lifetimes. He was not a nervous man. He was not an imaginative man, by his own admission. His ex-wife had said so often enough that he had eventually accepted it as fact, the way you accept a diagnosis. He dealt in the concrete, cargo weights, fuel costs, road conditions, the precise, reliable arithmetic of getting from one place to another in the fewest possible hours. He was good at his job the way a river is good at flowing. Not through effort, but through absolute alignment between nature and purpose. He had driven Route 14 exactly once before the night this story begins, about 6 years earlier, when a highway closure had pushed his usual route south through a stretch of rural road he didn't know and had no particular desire to know again. It was the kind of road that exists in every country in the world, straight, featureless, flanked on both sides by flat, dark land that could have been fields or wasteland or the edge of the world for all you could tell in the dark. No towns, no rest stops. Just the road and the night and the occasional billboard advertising something in lettering too faded to read. He remembered 2 things from that first time. The billboard for a chicken restaurant, a cartoon bird in a chef's hat, grinning, one wing raised like it was about to tell you the punchline of a joke. And a dead tree about 40 kilometers in, struck by lightning at some point in the past, split down the middle and frozen in that split, like an old wound, white wood showing through the bark like bone. He remembered thinking both times, on the way there and on the way back, that the tree looked like it was screaming. He had not thought about either of those things in 6 years, until the night of November 14th, when a pileup on the main highway forced his dispatcher to reroute him through the south, through the flat, dark land, through Route 14. He did not feel good about it. He couldn't have told you why. He noted the feeling the same way you note a weather change in your joints. Registered, filed, ignored. And he pulled onto Route 14 at 11:47 p.m. with 4 tons of frozen goods in the trailer and a delivery window of 6 a.m. He had plenty of time. That was the first thing he told himself. He would not be telling himself that for long. The billboard appeared at kilometer 23. The cartoon chicken in the chef's hat, one wing raised. He recognized it immediately. Not with surprise exactly, but with the small satisfaction of a detail confirmed. The way you feel when a memory you weren't sure about turns out to be real. There it is. He drove past it. He noted the dead tree at kilometer 41, slightly different from how he remembered. The split wider, the white wood more exposed to weather, but recognizably the same tree, the same frozen scream. He nodded at it slightly, the private acknowledgement of a man alone on a dark road, and kept driving. At kilometer 58, he hit a pothole, deep, jarring, the kind that rattles every bolt in a rig and makes you wince for your suspension. He noted the kilometer, made a mental note to log it for dispatch. At kilometer 71, he saw lights. Distant, off to the right, a low, flat building with a single lamppost, outside burning orange against the black. A petrol station. He checked his gauge. He was fine on fuel, but his coffee had run out an hour ago, and he had another 4 hours minimum before delivery. He indicated, pulled in. The gravel of the forecourt was old and uneven, weeds pushing up through the cracks, the kind of maintenance that says either nobody comes here often or nobody has cared for a very long time. One pump, one light, one window with a yellow glow behind it. He went inside. The attendant was a man of indeterminate age, somewhere between 50 and 70, the kind of face that time had worked on without leaving a clear timestamp. He was sitting on a stool behind the counter reading a newspaper, so old the edges had gone soft. He looked up when Dai Jung came in. He did not smile. He did not say hello. He just looked at him with an expression that Dai Jung would spend a lot of time thinking about in the days that followed. An expression he could only describe when he tried as the face of someone watching a thing they have watched before and cannot stop. Dai Jung bought a coffee from a machine that looked approximately as old as the attendant and tasted approximately as old as the road. He nodded. The attendant nodded back. Dai Jung went back to his truck. He pulled out of the forecourt at 12:34 a.m. and got back on Route 14 heading north. At kilometer 23, he passed the billboard, the cartoon chicken, the raised wing. He slowed down. He looked at it in his mirrors as it shrank behind him. He drove for another minute, telling himself it was a different billboard. Same franchise, different location. There must be 2 of them on this road. Fast food companies put up billboards in clusters. Everyone knows that. He drove for another 2 minutes, telling himself the same thing with slightly less conviction. Then he hit the pothole. Kilometer 58, same pothole. He felt it in his spine. He pulled over onto the hard shoulder and sat with the engine running and the hazard lights blinking orange into the dark, and he did the very reasonable, very logical thing of taking out his phone and opening his Maps application. The GPS showed him on Route 14, heading north, 31 kilometers from the junction with the main highway, everything exactly where it should be. He pulled back onto the road. At kilometer 71, the petrol station light burned orange on his right. Now here is what a certain kind of person does at this point. The kind of person who trusts instruments and logic and the evidence of their own competent eyes over the cold, irrational whispering of instinct. They find an explanation. They work through it methodically. The GPS must have glitched and turned him around without him noticing. He had been tired, distracted. He had somehow turned the truck around at the petrol station without registering it. These things happen to tired people on dark roads. The mind can go somewhere else entirely and leave the body to drive on autopilot. He had heard of this. He had, if he was honest, experienced minor versions of it himself, coming to at a familiar intersection with no clear memory of the last 10 minutes of driving. He pulled into the petrol station again. The attendant looked up from the same newspaper. Same expression. The soft, terrible patience of it. Dai Jung stood in the doorway and said, "I was just here." The attendant said, "I know." Dai Jung said, "I think I turned around somehow, at the forecourt. I think I drove back the way I came without realizing." The attendant said nothing. Dai Jung said, "Is there another petrol station on this road, further north? Another one that looks like this?" The attendant looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "There is only this one." Dai Jung asked to use the bathroom. He needed a minute. He needed to splash water on his face and stand in a small room and give his brain time to catch up with what was happening. The attendant gestured toward the back. Daijun went through a narrow corridor that smelled of damp and old grease, and he stood at a sink with rust stains below the tap, and he ran cold water over his wrists and looked at himself in a mirror that had the backing peeling away at the edges so that parts of his reflection were simply gone, dissolved into silver-gray nothing, and he told himself very firmly, "You are tired. You are on a dark road. You turned around without knowing it. This has a rational explanation. Get in the truck, head north. Do not stop until you hit the highway junction." He went back through the corridor. He went back through the narrow shop with its dead coffee machine and its yellowed shelves, and he was almost at the door when he saw the counter. Not the attendant. The attendant was still on his stool, still with his newspaper. The counter itself. There was a drawer beneath it, slightly open, the way a drawer gets when it's overfull and can't close completely. And through the gap, Daejong could see the edge of something, the corner of a brown leather wallet, and beside it the rectangular shape of a phone in a case, and beside that the outline of a set of keys on a ring. He stopped. He said, "What's in the drawer?" The attendant didn't look up from his paper. He said, "Lost property." Daejong said, "Can I see it?" The attendant put down his paper then. He looked at Daejong with that same expression, the watching a thing you have watched before expression. And he reached down and he pulled the drawer all the way open and set it on the counter. Inside the drawer were wallets, phones, keys, packed in so tightly they had compressed against each other, edges and corners interlocking. Daejong stared at the drawer. He could not have counted the individual items. Dozens, maybe 50, maybe more. All the mundane, essential things a person carries when they go somewhere they expect to come back from. The absolute proof, in aggregate, that many people had been in this petrol station and had left without their things, or had not left at all. He said, "Whose are these?" The attendant said, "Truck drivers, mostly. Some regular cars. One motorcyclist about 3 years ago." Daejong said, "What happened to them?" The attendant said, "Same thing that happens to all of them. They get back on the road. They drive north. They pass the billboard. They hit the pothole. They end up back here." He paused. After a while, they stopped coming inside. The sentence landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Daejong said, "What do you mean they stopped coming inside?" The attendant picked up his newspaper. He said, "They just keep driving, round and round, until they don't anymore." Daejong went back to the truck. He sat in the cab for a long time. 17 years of driving had given him a relationship with his own fear. He knew what it felt like, knew how to assess it, knew the difference between the rational alarm of genuine danger and the irrational static of an exhausted mind. What he was feeling right now was neither of those things cleanly. It was both layered, indistinguishable from each other, like two radio stations bleeding into the same frequency. He called dispatch. The signal dropped immediately. Dead air. He tried his wife, his ex-wife, he corrected himself, the woman he called when things were genuinely wrong, because whatever they were now, they had been partners for 11 years, and there are certain emergencies you only trust to someone who knew you before you were afraid. Dead air. He tried emergency services. Dead air. He sat with his phone in his hand and looked at the screen. Full signal. 3 bars. Every app working, the GPS map updating in real time, showing him exactly where he was. At the petrol station on Route 14, 31 kilometers from the junction. The phone was not broken. The signal was not broken. The calls were connecting to something and being absorbed by it, the way sound is absorbed by deep water. He opened his messages. He typed to his ex-wife, "Something is wrong on Route 14. I am stuck in a loop. Petrol station at kilometer 71. If you don't hear from me," he stopped. He didn't know how to finish that sentence in a way that didn't sound like a man losing his mind on a dark road at 1 in the morning. He sent it anyway. She did not reply. He started the truck. He tried everything a logical man tries. He drove south instead of north, back the way he had come onto the road, toward the junction at the other end. He drove for 40 minutes, which should have taken him well past the southern junction and onto familiar roads. He passed the dead tree. He passed the billboard. He hit the pothole. He arrived at the petrol station. He drove with his hazard lights on as slowly as the truck would go, watching the odometer. The numbers climbed. Kilometer after kilometer, the road unreeling in his headlights, flat and straight and endless. He drove until the fuel gauge began to drop in a way that frightened him, because fuel running out on an infinite road is a specific and terminal problem. And then he turned around again. He stopped at the dead tree. He got out of the truck. He walked to it and put his hand on the bark, rough, real, cold. And he looked at the split down its center, the white wood, and up close it did not look like screaming. It looked like opening, like something that had been split apart and was simply patiently waiting in that state of exposure for something to enter it. He carved his initials into the bark with his thumbnail, pressing as hard as he could, DJ Rough, barely visible in the dark. He got back in the truck. He drove north. At kilometer 58, he hit the pothole. At kilometer 71, he pulled into the petrol station and got out and walked directly to the dead tree at the side of the forecourt. There was no dead tree at the side of the forecourt. He was confused. The trees were back at kilometer 41. And he stopped. He stood in the forecourt gravel and understood something that he had been circling for the past 2 hours without being able to land on it. The road was not a loop. A loop implies return, going far enough in one direction that you curve back around to where you started. This was not that. This was something smaller and more terrible. This was a stretch of road, perhaps 50 kilometers, that simply repeated. Billboard, dead tree, pothole, petrol station. Over and over, seamless, the end stitching invisibly to the beginning. A closed seam in the world with him inside it. He went back into the petrol station. The attendant looked up. Dae-jung said, "How do I get out?" The attendant was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's the question they all ask eventually." Da-jung said, "And what do you tell them?" The attendant said, "I tell them the truth, that I don't know, that I've been here at this station, on this road, long enough to have stopped counting the drivers, and in all that time I have seen 2 people get off this road." Dae-jung said, "2? What did they do?" The attendant said, "One of them I couldn't tell you. She just wasn't here anymore one night." No explanation. Her truck was parked at the hard shoulder at kilometer 41 when I drove past in the morning, empty, lights still on. Whether that counts as getting out or getting taken, I honestly couldn't say. Dae-jung breathed carefully. He said, "And the other one?" The attendant folded his newspaper with the deliberate care of a man who has learned not to rush the important parts of things. He said, "The other one remembered." Dae-jung waited. The attendant said, "The road keeps you because it knows you. It has something of yours, some reason you belong to it, some connection you made with it that you haven't settled yet. Every driver in that drawer," he gestured at the counter, "came to this road carrying something unfinished. A debt, a memory, something done or not done. The road recognizes it, holds on to it, holds on to you." He looked at Dae-jung steadily. The one who got out. He sat in his cab for 18 hours. Not driving, just sitting. I brought him coffee. He didn't sleep. He just thought. And at some point, I don't know exactly when because I wasn't watching every second, he started crying. Hard. The kind of crying a grown man does when he's finally done pretending something didn't happen. And when he was done, he started his engine. And I watched his headlights pull out of the forecourt, and I watched them disappear over the horizon, north, and they didn't come back. Silence in the small, bright room. Dae-jung said, "What was his unfinished thing?" The attendant said, "Not my place to know. Not my place to ask. Same goes for you." Dae-jung sat in his cab until 4 a.m. He did not try to drive. He turned the engine off, which he had never done before on a job, because you never fully kill a truck in the field unless you have to. And he sat in the dark and the cold with his hands in his lap, and he thought. He thought about his ex-wife. He thought about the last year of their marriage, which had not been a bad year in the way people mean when they talk about bad marriages. No cruelty, no catastrophe, but had been a year in which he had been almost completely absent while physically present, driving when he didn't need to drive, volunteering for routes that took him away for weeks at a time, choosing the long road again and again and again, while she sat at home and waited, and eventually, with a sadness so quiet it was almost gentle, stopped waiting. He had told himself for 3 years that it was the job, that he was a certain kind of man, a roadman, that domesticity didn't fit his nature. He had told himself she understood, that she had known who he was when she married him, that the ending was mutual and reasonable and nobody's fault. He sat in the dark on the repeating road, and he thought about the morning she had asked him, very simply, very directly, without drama. "Do you actually want to come home? Not come home to sleep and go again. Come home. Stay." And he thought about how he had answered, not with words. He had answered by looking at the floor, by letting the silence go on too long, by saying eventually, "I've got to run to Busan on Thursday," and watching her face do the thing it did. Not fall, exactly. More like close, the way a building closes at the end of the day, lights going off one room at a time. He had been running from something that required him to stay still long enough to feel it, and he had turned that running into a career and a personality and a life philosophy, and the road. This road, or whatever the road was a face of, had seen all of it and had found it familiar. The road knew him because he had been living on roads his whole adult life. Not this road specifically. All roads, the same road wearing different faces over and over, because he had never once arrived anywhere and stayed. He got out of the truck. He stood on the road in the dark. He looked north, the direction of the billboard and the tree and the pothole and the petrol station and the seamless invisible join that brought it all back to here. He took his phone out and he opened his messages, and he wrote to his ex-wife, a longer message this time, a true one, the kind that costs something to write and more to send. He told her that he was sorry, not for the divorce that had needed to happen, they both knew it. He was sorry for the morning she had asked him if he wanted to come home, and he had answered by looking at the floor. He was sorry that he had never found a way to explain that it wasn't her he was running from, had never been her, but that this explanation didn't matter because the destination of a man's running is irrelevant to the people he runs past. He was sorry that he had let the silence speak for him when the silence lied. He pressed send. He did not expect her to be awake. He did not expect a reply. His phone buzzed in his hand. She had sent 3 words. Not the 3 words, something simpler and, in that moment, more necessary. "Drive safe, Day." He stood on the road and held the phone and felt something move in his chest. Not break, exactly. Open. The way the dead tree had opened, exposing the white wood underneath. He got back in the truck. He started the engine. He pulled out of the hard shoulder and he drove north, and he passed the petrol station without stopping, and the forecourt light burned orange in his mirrors, and he watched it shrink and disappear, and he kept driving, and he hit the pothole at kilometer 58 and felt it in his spine, and he kept driving, and at kilometer 41 he passed the dead tree, and in his headlights he saw on the bark two rough initials scratched deep. DJ. He exhaled. He passed the billboard at kilometer 23. The cartoon, chicken, grinning, wing raised, and for the first time it did not look like the punchline to a joke he couldn't hear. It looked simply like a thing on a road. An ordinary, slightly garish, entirely mundane thing on an ordinary road in the dark. At kilometer 0, the junction appeared. The main highway. 4 lanes, lit orange, a truck ahead of him in the right lane, a service area signed 1 kilometer ahead. The most beautiful, ordinary, unremarkable sight he had ever seen in 17 years of driving. He drove onto the highway. He did not look in his mirrors. He made the delivery at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes ahead of the window. He looked for Route 14 on his way home. He had the road number. He knew roughly where the southern junction should be. He drove the area for 2 hours in his personal car in full daylight and found nothing. The roads in that region ran north-south in a clean grid, and none of them were numbered 14, and none of them matched his memory of the flat, dark land and the dead flat fields on either side. He filed a report with his company about the pothole at kilometer 58, Route 14. The logistics coordinator told him there was no Route 14 in the region. He said the reroute had taken him through Route 41, a short bypass road, fully lit, 11 kilometers, a petrol station at kilometer 7 that was open 24 hours and had 3 pumps and a hot food counter. Nothing like what he described. The dispatcher who had rerouted him that night had since left the company. No forwarding contact. His ex-wife, when he called to thank her for the message, said she hadn't been awake at 4 a.m. She had sent no such reply. She showed him her phone. There was no message from him that night, no message from him in 3 months. He checked his own sent messages. They were there. His long message, timestamp 4:07 a.m. Her reply, timestamp 4:09 a.m. 3 words. On her phone, nothing. As if the message had been sent to a number that existed in one place and not the other, delivered by something the cellular network had no record of. He kept the screenshot. He looked at it sometimes when the road got long and dark and quiet and the white lines began their hypnotic pulse. He kept it as proof, though proof of what he could not exactly say. He took a desk job the following spring. Nothing dramatic. He was 44. His knees had been complaining for years. The pay was comparable. The hours were human. People asked if he missed the road. He said yes, in the way you miss anything that was also slowly eating you alive. He never drove at night again. The petrol station at kilometer 71 of Route 14 is still open. It is always open. The man behind the counter with the careful, patient watching expression is still there. The drawer beneath the counter is still full, a little fuller now than it was the night Dae-jung sat in his cab and thought about all the things he had run from and never said. And somewhere on that road right now, on the flat, dark stretch between the billboard and the dead tree, between the pothole and the station, in the seamless, repeating dark, there are headlights, moving north, confident at first, then slower, then stopped, then moving again, then north, then the billboard, then the tree, then the pothole, then the light. So before I let you go tonight, and I promise I will let you go in just a moment, I want to leave you with one last question. And unlike the one I asked at the beginning, this one I don't want you to answer out loud. Just think about it, quietly, to yourself. Is there a road you keep coming back to, a choice, a silence, a moment you drove past without stopping, that the world has been trying to make you face for longer than you'd like to admit? Because the road doesn't forget, and neither, if you're honest, do you? Drive carefully tonight, stay on the lit roads, and if you find yourself passing the same billboard twice, don't stop at the petrol station. Good night from Abyss of Horror. We'll see you on the next one, if you make it back.